was leaked to the Mail on Sunday by the Sussex side.
Let's talk about something people don't want to connect, but absolutely should. Because when you look at a reporter like Tom Sykes and his relentless and often obsessive hostility towards Meghan and sometimes towards her daughter, you realize that this doesn't exist in a vacuum. It has a psychology and a pattern and a history he has actually written about himself. So Tom has told the world in his own words that the defining trauma of his life was being abandoned by his father at the age of 14. And he describes it as a betrayal. He describes losing faith in a man that he adored. He describes becoming angry, reckless, addicted to alcohol, self-destructive, and more importantly, obsessed with male failure and male shame. Now, park that to one side because I'm going to come back to that later. And even if he doesn't consciously say that's what it is, that's what his obsession is with, male failure and male shame. Park that to one side. Now, hold that next to Harry. So hold Tom's story of male shame and male failure next to Harry. Harry did the thing that Tom's father didn't do. Harry didn't leave. He didn't abandon. He didn't choose status, comfort, or approval over his wife and children. So Harry did what Tom's father failed to do. Harry protected, he provided, and he shielded his family. Harry saw the harm that his family, well, the institution, was enacting on his wife and child, and he decided to walk away. Now, this contrast, it matters more than people think. And that's because for men like Tom that grew up with absent fathers, there is often a buried, volatile mix of resentment and idealization. On the one hand, they rage at the man who left. On the other hand, there's a desperate need in these children like Tom to believe that leaving was inevitable, justified, or even noble. Because if it isn't, the original abandonment becomes unbearable for them. So Harry breaks that psychological defense that Tom has built up for himself. And for some men, that is intolerable. And that is why I feel that Tom thinks that his attacks are justified. Because if Harry could choose differently, then maybe abandonment wasn't destiny. Maybe it wasn't unavoidable. Maybe it wasn't masculinity. Maybe it was cowardice. And no man wants to think of their dad as a coward. And that is where Tom's rage comes from. Now, notice that when Tom attacks Meghan in particular, or her daughter in particular, the attacks are not about policy or facts or even consistent behavior. The attacks are emotional. They're sneering, they're punitive, they're fixated on Meghan as a woman who is too protected, too prioritized, and too defended, in his opinion. There is a specific kind of bitterness, that when a man watches another man do what his own father didn't do for him. Wow, I love that. It's not so, at the end of the day, it's not really about Meghan. It's about Harry refusing to let Meghan suffer. And when you understand that, you understand that the cruelty towards Meghan and Lilibet becomes even more revealing, because children represent legacy. They represent continuity, they represent presence, and they represent protection. Everything that was missing from Tom's life. So when you see a man that is showing up very fiercely for his own children, that can trigger unresolved grief in people who grew up without that psychological safety. And when that grief isn't processed, it mutates into contempt and hatred. And that is why the tone is not detached. That's why Tom's tone is always personal. And that's why that tone isn't journalistic. And that's why it often crosses over into something personal, obsessive, and disproportionate. Add to that Tom's own history of addiction, of excess, of shame, recovery, a life he has described as spinning out of control while the authority figures around him failed him. You start to see why he's drawn to the narratives where women are blamed, men are excused, and institutions are never at fault. Meghan disrupts his worldview of all that. She didn't quietly endure. She didn't accept mistreatment. She didn't raise her child. Instead, a terrible system she believed was harming them, and her husband backed her and supported her. That combination of a woman who refuses suffering and a man who chooses her is profoundly destabilizing to people whose emotional architecture was built around endurance and silence and abandonment. So when you see the volume, when you see his defensiveness, when you see the fixation and the confidence, you need to understand this. Confidence that he displays when he's blasting Meghan does not come from certainty. It doesn't come from evidence. It actually comes from him needing something to be true in order to survive his own story. And that's the part of the conversation that people avoid because it's very uncomfortable, but it explains it far more than any tabloid narrative could. So anytime I see him raging, I feel sorry for him because he is probably the least successful out of all his siblings. He was the most troubled out of all his siblings. His sisters are doing exceedingly well. It was his sisters that helped him to get the journalistic jobs that he got. So yeah, I now understand why he would look at somebody like Meghan and resent her. But anyway, what do you think? These are just my musings. I am not a psychologist. I am not a psychotherapist, but these are just observations I've made. Yeah, let me know what you think.
There are many of you that are going to come across this content and many other content by people who are well-dressed, look and sound well-spoken. They look like they know what they are talking about. I promise you they don't know what they are talking about. This man is a very good example. His name is Tom Sykes. Tom Sykes lies. And I really do think that Tom Sykes has a mental illness. He was a coke and alcohol addict. And he was somebody who was able to attend Eton. So you know that he does, or his family does come from money. But yeah, he did have a drinking and coke addiction problem. I don't know if he was ever a journalist or anything of that nature, but he moved in the circles that Harry and William did. I don't know why he couldn't find anything else to do with his life. Like I said, he clearly comes from money. I don't know why of all the things he chose to do with his life, this is what he's doing. Maybe his family cut him off because of his drug addiction problems. I don't know. But this person has been going around on Substack, on YouTube, on any platform he can get, spreading lies and misinformation. He is apparently the royal editor of Daily Beast. He is dangerous. So this is my thing. Tread carefully. 99% of the things that he says are lies.
Squaddies. Ladies, gentlemen, royal watchers, and everyone who's ever side-eyed a tabloid headline, welcome back. Today we're doing something a little different. We're not just covering Harry and Meghan. We're covering the man covering Harry and Meghan. Because at this point, Tom Sykes doesn't have a beat, he has a Sussex obsession, and it might be time somebody said it out loud. Harry lands somewhere, Sykes has a take. Meghan posts a product, Sykes has a take. Harry has coffee with his father. Sykes has 3 paragraphs and a theory. If the Sussexes stayed home and watched a documentary, give it 24 hours, Sykes would find a way to connect it to the line of succession. I'm exaggerating. A little. But squaddies, you get where I'm going with this. And today's episode is going to be a fun one, because the same people who insist Harry and Meghan are washed up, irrelevant, yesterday's news cannot stop talking about them. Somebody explain that math to me. Now, let's be fair for a second, because we always try to be fair on this channel. Journalists are allowed to cover public figures. Tom Sykes has a job, and part of that job is writing about people who move headlines. Harry and Meghan move headlines. That's not in dispute. But here's the pivot. Squaddies, there's a difference between covering someone and being unable to stop covering someone, no matter how small the story gets. There's a difference between analysis and obsession. And once you start building an entire content pipeline around 2 private citizens' every move, at some point the question isn't, why are Harry and Meghan still relevant? It's, why can't you look away? So let's go through the receipts. Start with the Charles meeting. Harry sits down with his father, a father, by the way, dealing with a serious health situation, which alone should make any reasonable person root for reconciliation instead of drama. And what did the rota do with that? They didn't report it as a family healing. They reported it as a geopolitical event. Suddenly there were sources predicting backlash, predicting resentment inside the firm, predicting consequences nobody could actually name. Squaddies, a son, visited his dad. That's the whole story. But the tabloid machine can't let a Sussex story just be a story. It has to become another chapter in some imaginary blood feud. And here's what gets me. For years, the narrative has been that Harry is the one who can't move on. Harry is the one stuck in the past. Harry needs to let it go. But the second Harry does something completely independent, travels somewhere, shows up at Invictus, meets his own father, certain commentators drag him straight back into royal family psychodrama. He could order a sandwich, and somebody would ask if William approved the filling. If the actual goal is letting Harry move on, then the plan should be simple. Let him move on. Stop measuring every single thing he does against the institution he already left. Now let's talk about Meghan, because this is where the receipts get really entertaining. A few weeks back, the storyline was that Meghan was quietly stepping back from, as ever, fading from her own brand. And what was the evidence? Another creator was featured promoting the product line. That's it. That was the whole scoop. Squaddies, that is not how branding works in 2026. Every major lifestyle brand on earth uses ambassadors, collaborators, influencers, and customer content. Founders don't have to personally. What's the acceptable amount of Meghan exactly? Because it sure looks like the answer is 0, and that, squaddies, is where derangement stops being a punchline and starts being an accurate description. Let's sit with the contradiction for a second, because it's the whole ball game. We are constantly told the Sussexes don't matter anymore, and yet commentators are writing thousands of words about them weekly. Publications are dissecting their business moves. Journalists are analysing their wardrobe choices at international events. Entire YouTube channels, Sykes included, have built recurring content series purely around tracking their every move. You don't have to like Harry and Meghan. You don't have to defend every decision they've made. But you can't credibly call someone irrelevant while building your entire career around covering them. That's not commentary anymore, that's a full-time beat with a Sussex-shaped name tag. And to be clear, we're not claiming to know what's in anyone's head. We don't know what Sykes privately believes, we don't know what motivates any individual journalist, and we're not going to pretend otherwise. What we can talk about is the pattern in public coverage, and the pattern is undeniable. Harry and Meghan sit at the exact intersection that makes headlines royalty, celebrity, family drama, philanthropy, business. That's a content engine the tabloids can't quit, because conflict sells, and a Sussex headline is a guaranteed click, regardless of whether the story is actually about conflict. This also feeds the other favourite tabloid pastime, the permanent Harry versus William scoreboard. Who's more popular? Who's more successful? Who's winning? It's exhausting, and frankly, it says more about the media's appetite for conflict than it does about either brother. Harry's Invictus work is his own. His humanitarian projects are his own. His marriage, his family, his life in California his own. Meghan's, as ever, her advocacy, her public speaking hers. The problem with the endless comparison machine is it refuses to let either of them simply exist independently. If Meghan launches a product, it's spun as a shot at the family. If Harry shows up somewhere, it's spun as a shot at his brother. Sometimes, squaddies, people are just living their lives. And then there was Meghan's appearance overseas. She gets on stage to speak about a genuinely important issue, and instead of covering what she actually said, the coverage instantly pivots to, what does this mean for the family? Chess move? Sometimes a speech is just a speech. So here's my message to Tom Sykes, and to the rota more broadly. Criticism is fair game. Nobody on this channel is asking for unconditional praise of Harry, and Meghan disagreement is healthy, and journalists are allowed to challenge public figures. But criticism has to be grounded in something real. If you're analysing branding, understand branding. If you're covering a humanitarian project, cover the actual work. Don't start with the conclusion and go hunting for evidence to back it up, because squaddies are sharper than that, and so is this audience. We see the goalpost moves. We see the old predictions quietly get buried when they don't pan out. We see when one couple gets held to a standard nobody else in that family faces. And that's really the ask here, not silence, not blind loyalty, just consistency. Same scrutiny for everyone. Same willingness to acknowledge wins. Same willingness to acknowledge mistakes. Because here's the truth, squaddies. Harry and Meghan don't need everyone's approval. They're not chasing the rota's permission to keep building their lives. Invictus, as ever, their kids, their causes, their careers. The people who want to follow that journey will follow it. The people who don't, won't. That's the whole deal. And if Tom Sykes keeps this up, we might just have to offer him an honorary squad membership. Imagine that headline. Tom Sykes finally admits it, I'm a squaddie now. That one would break the internet. If this video gave you life today, smash that subscribe button, drop a comment telling me which Meghan is fading headline aged the worst, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay sharp, stay informed, and keep supporting the Sussexes.